Okay, thank you all for being here. I have 5 to 7 minutes for this introduction, so I'm going to plow through it straight away. I have a couple of thank yous, and so first of all to the staff at the New York Studio School for all they've done to make this survey show and lecture possible. That's painter Rachel Rickard, painter Martin Dull, and painter Leanne Maxey. I'm titled as the curator, but in actuality, painter Claude Carone, one of Nick's twin sons, and I discussed, argued, and made each selection for the show. So a special thanks goes out to Claude. I want to acknowledge the entire Carone family. Mark DeRossi, Nick's filmmaker nephew, the executor of Nick's estate. Son Christian, who many of you might know for his excellent photography of artworks. Painter Maddie Carone, Nick's little brother. And Rose Ballantyne, Nick's sister, lifelong champion and supporter of Nicky and his works. And thank you to writer David Ramm, who agreed to take on an in-depth biographical essay about Nick for our centennial celebration. David met and interviewed Nick in 2003 for a shorter article published in Biography magazine. His research included countless lengthy interviews with family and friends and advice from artist and wife Nicole Czar, who studied with Nick in Italy. A special shout out to painter Noreen Naughton, who's here from Hawaii. Noreen studied with Nick in the 60s and the 90s and remained a lifelong friend. She's here tonight with a limited number of her recently finished book of and about Nick's teachings. It's an amazing document. Talk to her after the lecture for details about obtaining a copy. We've got 5 shows in the works around the country to celebrate the centennial of Nick's birth in 1917. All details and planning for these events would not have been possible without the work of art lover, an art consultant, and my pal, Susan Stedman. And finally, a very special thank you to my friend and dean and painter Graham Nixon for hosting the Centennial Show and panel. Graham, as you all are aware, has made the Studio School, in addition to being a very important role in teaching young artists, a welcome center not only for artists, and historians and former students and collectors and writers and dealers and administrators to gather and learn and share. Okay, that's out of the way. Now to Nick. So I've got 2 great quotes, and I won't even say anything about them. Leonardo, here we go. Stop sometimes and look into the stains of walls or the ashes of a fire or clouds or mud or like places in which, if you consider them well, you may find really marvelous ideas. The mind of a painter is stimulated to new discoveries, the composition of battles of animals and men, various compositions of landscapes and monstrous things such as devils and similar things, which may bring you honor because by indistinct things the mind is stimulated to new inventions. And the second wonderful one is very short. It's from Midsummer Night's Dream. In the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush supposed a bear? Okay, I strongly assert the following premise. Nick's remarkable late works and paintings, works on paper and sculpture, are not only fun, brilliant, bawdy, mind-blowing, imaginative experiences, but these works take the figurative tradition through automatism, a noteworthy step forward. Nick's mantle and command and confluences were the classical, as demonstrated by the great work of Michelangelo, the teachings of Hans Hofmann, which can be explained in a single word, the plane, the expressionistic call and response attitude and mark making of the 1950s, his friendship with Jackson Pollock and Pollock's work, and Roberto Matta. And I think you'll hear more about Matta in a little bit. Here I'll quote Matta on automatism as David Ramm has in the exhibition catalog. Matta saw it as a call and response process between the unconscious and a more light-footed conscious mind, a method of reading live the actual function of thinking at the same speed as the matter we are thinking of, to read at the speed of events, to grasp unconscious material unconscious material functioning in our memory and at the tools of our disposal. My premise, and I'll get to these pictures right after this, is that Nick fulfilled this quote exactly. Working from automatism with his command and connection to classical figuration, his respect for tradition, and his attention to the plane, Nick was able to access and let flow through his hand his imagination thinking. And I'm going to try not to talk too much. I've got 5 seconds because I'm showing a lot of slides. I've grouped them into figurative, abstract, some heads, a demonstration of Nick drawing, and then this word morphing, which is things morph before your very eyes in the best of Nick's works. And I have a couple of thematic categories, and then some sculpture, and then some final couple works. I've got 5 seconds. Don't anybody yell out, slow down, because we've got a lot to cover tonight. So go ahead, David. Sorry. I've been practicing this. Oh, wait. Okay. So these are figurative early works that are mostly self-contained, and he's studying and mastering the, oh, that is fast, the figure in pencil. These are waxes. This is Elisa Jensen. This is for you. That was in his studio. These are waxes late in life that are so beautiful. Nick wanted to make these in 2/3 life size and in bronze, and maybe that will happen one day, and maybe in my lifetime. They're very, very gorgeous figurative works. Nick did them when he was legally blind. Now we're going to get to some sepia chalk drawings. This is figuration, but he's also exploring, he liked multiple figure combinations and exploring just some straightforward figurative study and play. Sometimes there's movement within things. It's very beautiful, fun to look at. The negative spaces are always very powerful. That one's got a lot of great movement and volume. And now I'm showing a couple of abstractions because Nick had a dual love of figurative and abstraction. The abstraction he really fell for with Hans Hofmann, and these are some pure abstractions that I thought maybe you hadn't seen or would be interesting to see. These were in the either the early 60s or the late 50s. They're gorgeous. They have some curves that seem like figures, but they're pure divisions and line divisions and volumes and movements on the plane. I put this 1950s painting in there just because he was so much a part of that, and this is a 60s painting that was in Loretta Howard's show, where Nick has, oh, well, very, okay, this is the heads now. So that's in his studio, and I'm showing these for one reason, and only a few, to show you his beautiful, beautiful brushstroke and mastery of traditional volume. Just, it's just kind of shocking because it's not what he, rested his laurels on. It was, he never was satisfied with what he could do. And these are just beautiful sort of close-up examples of how he moves through this. There's a gorgeous painted head show right now in Chelsea. Loretta Howard has it, so you all should see that. There's one more close-up. Beautiful painting. So this is Isabelle Devroux at Nick's studio, and probably keep your eyes on the actual drawing. She was writing for a catalog that we did at LohinGeduld Gallery, and Nick said he'd do a drawing for her. And I just was moving around up and down a ladder, taking these pictures, but it really shows how Nick started with a scribble and looked at that scribble, looked into it, and started to see his imagination started going. Sometimes it seems really slow sometimes. He claimed he had no idea what was going to happen when he began a work, where it was going to go. I think that's true. We have a couple of the where it ended up. After this series, so this kind of shows how he let the image itself dictate to him, or how he could go in there and see things and change what was there already and move it into something else. That head comes out of nowhere. Now he's getting rid of it. It's there. Now it's just shooting up the right-hand side. It's kind of amazing. So now I'm just putting some morphing before our very eyes images. These are ones that are more developed. This is a larger painting where Nick developed a lot longer than the demonstration with Isabel. Just pursued his own, abstract love of negative space, positive space, the line, volume. These all are very worthy a longer look, but okay, now we're on themes. Okay, this is animals, and I love this one. It's a little crazy. This one in the middle triangle on the bottom, there's a ferocious dog. There's a horse there. Nick did horses all his life. This one has a dog cat or some other kind of morphing thing that looks like it's jumping. Here's a horse with two heads that there's some kind of a abduction. Here's one that goes closer to abstraction. And now we are moving to another category. This is religious ones. I wish these could slow down, but so this is sort of a series that was part of a show at the Butler Institute. This one is so beautiful. I wish we could stop it. It's a double crucifix with, this is Claude's favorite. This one is a beautiful lamentation. Here we go. Sorry, but we have so much to cover. Okay, and so now there's a couple erotica. And the Kinsey Institute has 30 of these things, but there were many more of just these private drawings that were really, really beautiful. And according to Nick, Dr. Kinsey thought they were the most erotic drawings that he had in his collection. These small bronzes were done in the 70s. They're very metaphysical in nature. And Loretta has a few of those in her office, in her gallery. And then we're getting to sticking with sculpture. This is the room in Italy that I went to select the stone heads that came this side of the Atlantic. Daunting, just daunting amount of things. It was helped by Liliana. And, but these pictures are just like an ancient discovery. And then I put 3 pictures of Nick's works in the light in his studio, and they're so monumental and extraordinary. And this last one, you'll see the difference in, inside light and studio light. This is the one that's downstairs right now. It just looks, and so now just a few more morphings, just wonderful, tight, volumetric, gorgeous, luminous images that Nick did, I would say late in his life. David, you're getting closer, so it must be. And then I'll be all finished. Just these all deserve a longer look, but I'm giving you short looks to just show you. These were all culled from portfolios that Nick foisted on me when I had the gallery. He would just take the top portfolio. It was a homemade portfolio, and I'd end up with 80 works on paper, and at the end of it, I had a lot to give back to the estate, over 400. And this is one of the last great paintings. And this is Shadow Dance, the one that's downstairs. And that is the end of my presentation. How long was it?
I don't know, but it was great. Thank you. Hi, good evening. I'm no fan of mics, but I hope everyone can hear me. I just want to, so Ro gave a lot of really wonderful context for seeing the work, and I felt like that's definitely the right place to start, is to look at the works. What I want to do is step back a little bit and look at some of the biographical, let's say, structure beneath that, and I have it just structured as 3 thoughts, meaning, but they're essentially, it's kind of moving over the course of the life. And I did it as 3 partially to tie to a quote that I give also in the essay in the catalog from John Graham. This is actually a note that John Graham wrote opposite the table of contents from System and Dialectic And I think it's a good quote, especially for Nick, about art passing through 3 stages, this kind of brash stage, then this longer, hesitating, all these things, studious stage, and then this third one, because I think it's shaped how I think about that life, and I've come to think of it as kind of having essentially these 3 stages of this kind of long early period, and then a much longer middle period that I'll go through here, and then a very final brilliant period of the last 5 years. So the first thought about this early part of Nick's life is that, and I'm just going to read it because I committed myself to this language, and so I feel like I have to read it. Carone's concept of the great artist and his desire to be that above all pushed him very far, very fast, and it kept him open to people who spoke the language of greatness. And by language of greatness, I don't necessarily mean the language per se. I'm talking about a kind of air of appreciation, a way of viewing things and talking about and having experiences that are related to this notion of greatness that was so fundamental to Nick and his outlook and what was a major driver for so much of his life. And I think to me that the key of that is really less about, let's say, one's abstract greatness in some hierarchy that's essentially akin to baseball collecting, but not that, but rather of these great experiences. And that idea of greatness comes probably above all from his family and his mother, who was kind of the origin of that. This is the beginning of that in this drive. So he's 14. On the left, you have the Belvedere torso from the Barg drawing course, and Nick's version of it, which Ro also showed briefly. And you can see at 14 a highly accomplished drawing, and very much tied to, of course, Michelangelo was a lover of the Belvedere torso, and this is really related to him. So the next slide is of, on the left you see the mural that Nick worked on. He was one of the 2 assistants to Leon Kroll, a teacher of his from the National Academy. And on the right is The Winemakers, which is the painting that won Nick the Rome Prize in 1941. You can see a lot of relationships between the 2 and a certain kind of commitment to a realism that's interesting mostly in terms of how it plays off of Kroll. And I think the nicest thing about that too is then this Cezanne landscape that's going on there. But it's worth saying, right, that Nick by that time, he was involved. When he won the Rome Prize, he knew he already was enmeshed. He was 23 at the time, and he already knew. Let's say I think he knew 4 of the 5 judges on the Rome Prize panel, and I think. But I emphasize that, right, because he was not somebody who was an art world insider by nature, right? He was from Hoboken, very working class family, but that drive had put him in this world, and he went around hungry for these kind of great experiences. And when he applied for the prize, he was recommended to do it by the head of the Met, right? So he's in this world where that kind of painting was, let's say, a ticket. And in a way, he could have kept doing that, right? He'd won his prize. There was a lot of reason to do that. But he goes in the Army, he gets frustrated with his own work. He's seeing a little bit of Pollock in 43, and so he goes to Hans Hofmann. And so on the left, you see a painting from 1946 that shows the Hofmann influence. But he doesn't stick in that world either, right? He's won the Rome Prize. He has a ticket to Rome in the form of some cash. He takes it, he goes to Rome, and this painting on the right is from that era. And he's instantly in this, again, he's kind of instantly in these higher reaches of the Roman art world. He's with Gattuso, he's on the Via Margutta. That's the world he's in at the time. But then he meets Mata, and we'll hear more about that, and you can see instantly the difference, right? Look at this kind of much more geometric, more clearly dated kind of 40s abstraction. And I include the one on the right partially to say that, you know, when you see these heads, the temptation is to imagine that they're all kind of drawn from John Graham, but that's really not the case. There's a lot of that already in Nick's work. Rose showed this earlier, so I won't linger on it, but he's back in New York. He's doing this abstract work, and then really fully enmeshed in the abstract expressionist scene. Both of these are downstairs. On the left, you have Member of a City Cast, which was in the 1956 Venice Biennale. On the right, Sound of Blue Light, which was in the 58 Brussels World Expo. And you can see that he's working. And I think the reason I juxtapose these partially is because the whole time, basically at least from 1951 forward, he's constantly working between heads. He's already involved in heads and abstraction and the figure coming out. There's essentially a matter of a few years at best where that figuration isn't in play. I wanted to quote this, which is a review of his first show at the Stable Gallery, which he kind of helped lead. And because I think it's telling that in 1956, you have a reviewer looking at Nick's work and going, now, is there an academy? Is there such a thing as a New York school? And it seems like a very precarious kind of historical moment that's now kind of hard to reimagine that there was a time when that was an issue. But it's also, I like the emphasis in the second part, that each person is student, each master. So he continues, right? These are from 1960. He leaves after 2 solo shows at the Stable. He goes to the Stamp Flea Gallery. This presumably is the kind of work on the left, at least, that he would have showed in 1961. He gets great reviews from his 59 show, really appreciative. Dory Ashton and another reviewer basically both say, I mean, almost line for line echoing, maybe this work isn't where it should be, but he's clearly going to be the leader in the future. They almost verbatim quote of Ashton, the early. But the 61 reviews are not good, and Nick walks away. He doesn't show in New York City between 1961 and 2005. And I think it's worth emphasizing how really strong that critical reputation was at that moment. And like leaving Kroll, like leaving Rome, leaving New York, leaving Hoffman and going to Rome, leaving Rome and coming back to New York, all these things. It's a risk that he takes, and I think it's driven partially by his own sense of that search for greatness. Whatever that means in real terms, I think it's worth dwelling on that. There's a lot we could say about that time period, and I hope we talk about it more. But I just mostly want to emphasize that there's a lot of work there, and I think that the work in particular that deserves notice are those heads that Rose showed some of earlier. And I think and though there's plenty of great art within it, I think the main thing they're just an incredible feat of imagination. They're a feat of imagination. They're this constant reimagining of empathy that I think is just really extraordinary. This is a tiny little sampling that I culled of things that I didn't think were otherwise out there. And you can see the difference, in style over time, the 72 one really closely related to that Member of a City Cast, but then lots of evolution. And this is really a tiny sampling, and there's so much going on in each of them, and so much of this projection of different feelings into them. The last thing I'll say is about that last period. In 2005, when he had his show at LohinGeduld, I feel like something incredible happened as a result of that. There was all kinds of beautiful work before that, but then there was something new after it. And that's from age 88 to 93. He's been legally blind, and yet something really incredible happens. And Shadow Dance downstairs is one of those examples. And there's also work up at Loretta Howard's gallery, one work from that same period. This is just an example, High Wire. I'll leave it there, and I'll ask Martica to speak now. Thank you.
have answers, Nick Carone once told an interviewer. So why should anyone else presume to have answers when discussing Carone's painting? To me, the compelling appeal of his canvases is the eternal question, who among us has the ultimate answer? And in this connection, I would mention that Carone was interested during at least part of his life in the ideas of Gurdjieff. And the Gurdjieffians, one of their leading tenets was that answering was frowned upon. They believed in keeping alive our most authentic and precious capacity, which is questioning. I'm not proposing to label Carone as a Gurdjieffian, but simply to say that Gurdjieff's ideas were floating around quite a bit in mid-century Manhattan and elsewhere in the United States, partly through the teachings of Krishnamurti, who was here. To avoid seeming to provide answers, I'm confining myself to two specific subjects that might offer insights regarding the Carone enigma. The first is his friendship with the Chilean artist Mata that began in 1949, and which he felt marked a turning point in his art. Up to that time, he had directed his prodigious skills toward mastering received modes, whether academic rendering or the spatial explorations of Hans Hofmann, both of which can be detected as subsurface elements in his late work. Although Mata was identified with the refugee surrealist group in New York during the Second World War, his own art had grown out of his training in architecture and his reading of visionary writers such as P.D. Uspensky, a follower of Gurdjieff, who rejected the limited prison house of sight in favor of accepting a limitless time dimension. Speaking of his own formation, Mata wrote, one of the teachers announced a seminar on relativity. The word interested me at once. It was fascinating to discover that there was no fixed point in the universe. Whether or not he was urged by Mata, Carone also responded to the writings of Uspensky and also his associate, his teacher, Gurdjieff. In the winter of 1942, just to explain a little bit about Mata, in the winter of 1942, Mata held sessions in his studio for American artists interested in exploring automatism, sessions attended by Basiotes, Motherwell, briefly Pollock, and several others. For the Americans, automatism became a way of finding new forms. Motherwell used the term plastic automatism, while for Mata, it was a means of psychic exploration. They took the empty forms and ignored the content, he said of the Americans. When Mata arrived at Carone's studio in Rome in 1949, thanks to an introduction from art dealer Alexandra Jolas, they shared a studio, exhibited together, and became lifelong friends. According to Carone, Mata approved of his new space, what he had learned from Hoffman, but urged him to use his stream of consciousness and to maintain a conscious-subconscious dialogue. It is this lurking subconscious content that ultimately set Carone apart from his abstract expressionist contemporaries, although he quickly adapted to the style when he returned to New York in late 1950 and could soon produce an almost perfect de Kooning-style drawing. My second subject is what followed in the heady 1950s as he arrived back in New York, in time to be included in the artist-generated 9th Street show that announced the beginning of the New York School. That show was held in an empty Greenwich Village storefront, but soon there was a new Midtown showcase for the burgeoning art community, a former livery stable on 7th Avenue just off Central Park South. At first, Alexandra Jolas was to be the behind-the-scenes director of this new gallery, but that didn't work out, and Carone, as assistant to owner Eleanor Ward, soon found himself responsible for selecting exhibitions. A foretaste of what was to come at the stable was the 1953 exhibition of Cy Twombly and Robert Rauschenberg. Coincidentally, that's the first exhibition that I was assigned to review when I started working for the old Art Digest. I have still a very strong visual. It was a shock, that show. Carone had met Twombly and been impressed by his work, but the latter would only show if his friend Rauschenberg was included. The dense black Rauschenbergs, and there was one of them in the recent Rauschenberg show at MoMA, one of these very big, dense paintings. And let's see, the large, dense black Rauschenbergs and the nearly all-white Twomblys were starkly new, already defiant toward the painterly all-over surfaces of abstract expressionism. To me, looking back, they are indicative of the attraction to contradictions, the characteristic of Carone. Former students say he would tell them something one day and its opposite the next, and was unfazed if someone pointed out the inconsistency. When I spoke about him here several years ago, I told the story of my going to see him regarding two drawings from the Muriel Callis Newman collection, which were about to be exhibited at the Metropolitan Museum, for which I'd been asked to write entries. He immediately disowned them. But on a different day, he said probably they were from a portfolio that had been stolen, and this is sort of typical of his ability to accommodate contradictions. At the stable, Carone not only persuaded Philip Pavia to reconstitute the Ninth Street show as the stable annual, but was instrumental in mounting introductory exhibitions of Joan Mitchell, Jack Torkoff, Isamu Noguchi, and many others, as well as organizing shows for two exceptional older figures on the New York scene, John Graham and Joseph Cornell. So for a period of almost 4 years, Nick Carone had a significant impact as novel exhibitions unfolded in that wonderful, well-lit space of the Stable Gallery. Meanwhile, he had 4 shows of his own, 2 at the Stable and 2 at the Stamfli Gallery between 1957 and 61. Then, for 40 years, he didn't show. So what does all this tell us about Carone? For myself, I'm reconciled to the idea that I would never be able to emerge with a neat analysis, that one insight might soon be nullified by another. The way wakefulness and dream can overlap and intersect in each other. What I love and admire is the courage it takes to be inconclusive and supremely eloquent at the same time.
God, I should have stayed home. 8 things I want to say about Nicolas Carone. 1, Nick Carone, who was born in 1917, showed regularly in New York from 1954 to 62, initially at the Stable Gallery. He was part of the scene. Then for whatever reason, which seems to me beside the point, he did not show again in New York until 2005, more than 40 years later. It was like he wandered into the desert. He was not written out of history so much as he vanished from it. And then one day, he reappeared. Carone belongs to what has been called the second generation, which is to say, he was born 5 years after Jackson Pollock and Agnes Martin, and nearly 15 years after Willem de Kooning. It is a generation that was and is disparaged by many, especially if the artist demonstrated what was called the 10th Street touch, a loaded brush or painted wet into wet. One can think of artists that got ignored or dismissed because of this. It was like they were lepers. Carone was one of them. Carone loved to draw. This is central to his work. He painted abstractly and figuratively, and he made sculptures of heads. To complicate this further, the figurative sculptors of that generation, and I'm thinking of Philip Pavia, Ruben Nakian and Konstantin Nivola have been neglected, overlooked, ignored, brushed aside. Take your choice for whatever reasons that have to do with the narrative of progress. 4. Carone paints abstractly, but the figure is central to his work. He worked with line, which is to say he drew in paint. There's a sparseness to his drawing in paint that's quite distinctive. He kept painting long after no one in America was looking at his work, and he stayed anchored to his roots. 5. The late abstract paintings do not fit into any history. They challenge us to see them without prejudice. There are paintings he does in acrylic in 2001 that speak to works he did in 1958. What are we to make of this? Shouldn't he have progressed? What's progress? 6. If we keep trying to see what similarities Carone shares with his peers or with Willem de Kooning, say, we stop looking at his work. 7. We seem to be trained to believe that we should fit in, belong to a group, become part of something larger. And yet, however much of a community that was among the artists at one time in this city, I cannot help but think that all of them, from Ad Reinhardt to Lee Krasner to Norman Lewis, knew there was nothing to fit into, that they were all outsiders. And no matter what happened, that would never change. Of course, something did happen around 1962, according to Thomas Hess, but what was it? 8. Maybe we should think more about artists who don't fit in and who are not part of the story, because that too is part of our history. Maybe we should think about the terms of exclusion and why we need them. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I just wanted to start with a few questions. I guess one of the things that's come up a number of times this evening is that, and I mentioned everyone has that kind of moment of leaving, and I was hoping, I wanted to see if anyone, and I guess I was thinking of starting with Martica, could speak to that historical moment and that 1961, 1962 moment, and what might have been going on there that historically that would have made Nick not show, made Nick choose not to show, something like that.
Well, I'm not sure that what affected so many other artists was what had the impact on Carone.
Right.
I mean, it was just the artists that I was particularly interested in were kind of second generation New York school who were trying to make a synthesis between figuration and abstraction, and we really regarded them as the coming thing. That was going to be the next thing. All of a sudden, pop art did an end run and carried the ball down the field, and these artists were left in the wake. I know I have no idea if that's what affected Nick,
Right.
but there are probably many other things.
And I wondered, John, if you had any thoughts about that time and what might have been going on.
Well, Tom Hess says that the art world changed one day, and he's talking about, I think, the end of the co-op gallery scene on 10th Street, and he just said people that used to talk to each other stopped talking to each other.
Huh.
And I think, you don't want to say, oh, he did this because of that, because I don't think life is ever that simple.
Mm-hmm.
That's some Newtonian notion of the universe that I don't quite believe in.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting is, even though he doesn't show, he keeps working at some high level. So you feel like it's not like he felt defeated by not showing, which, I mean, I've been in enough studios where someone who hasn't shown is just grumpy. And whether he was grumpy or not, he's not grumpy in his work.
Right.
Right? And he's trying. And also I love the fact that he makes sculptures, he does this, he's not trying to fit in. all through his life, and I think he must have known that that was going to be pushed against him, because you were supposed to fit in, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you can't say, oh, this is who he is, right? And I think that's really remarkable.
Yeah.
But probably not the model people should follow.
Certainly not an easy model to follow
No,
if you need to pay the rent.
Because you're to be someone, and someone that is like a package,
Right.
right? And he's not a package.
Yeah, I agree. Ro, did you have anything you wanted to say about that?
Well, I was thinking, we can all say it's 40 years he didn't show, and it was, 1960 to 2005, but he may have, but at least in 61 he was 44 years old. He may not have thought that that was the way it was going to play out for all those years. And he did have an ego, and I think he might have known the value of what he was doing, but the world had changed. There were points where he was grumpy and bitter and angry at the world, and thought that, I couldn't see him schlepping at age 60 his slides around to dealers or anything like that. The world has got really strange. And I feel like, time is moves so fast, and all of a sudden he's in this position of being very masterly or very good at what he's doing, and in the wrong age at the wrong time to be going around and schlepping his work.
Yeah.
I think he just withdrew and kept working.
Yeah. I mean, to me, part of that period is, that one reason I emphasized in my comments that the success, let's say, of that early period is it never gave him, in a sense, it never gave him an obscure time. Of course, he wasn't, instantly the leading painter or something. I don't want to overstate that. But I do think that part of what that did is it gave him a time to kind of test in private, in a way, that to think through things really deeply that he had already learned. I mean, it's a kind of the inverse of, let's say, the imagined model of the person who labors in obscurity and then becomes famous. It kind of reverses that whole structure. And I think that it is, to me, completely remarkable and admirable that he does a lot during that time. But I also think that it maybe is a kind of conscious move or something to explore in that way. I also wanted to ask, we've now seen a lot of work thanks to, largely to Ro, and I guess looking at the work, I wanted to know what other people saw in terms of, let's say, more unexpected influences on Nick, if there's anything that strikes people. I'm happy to, if someone has an instant answer. Martica, please.
Well, maybe this isn't answering your question, but you spoke about somebody in your essay in the catalog that had a very important impact on him in the 60s, but you left that a mystery. Did you want to elaborate on that at all?
I think in the 60s, the one that really stands out is probably is Balthus. And I don't remember in the essay actually if I referred to him, but I think that's probably the strongest. And I think you can see that, and particularly in the heads, that influence there. I think for me, like the 60s, a lot of it. In that essay, I'm a little confused about that particular time and what is going on. But I'd say that's probably the strongest one. Any others that people come to? No.
Well, it's clear that he likes classical art all his life, and he's not afraid to. I was just thinking about that because I wrote a piece about Leonard Anderson. Just the idea that you would try and draw in a way that honors them, but make a drawing that's in the present, not nostalgic for the past, and how. And it was just thought of as a ridiculous thing to do. It's like, why would you do something like that? That seems, that art became about rupture and not continuity. And how do you make continuity without being nostalgic?
Right.
I think that's something.
Right.
that these two people who made, I don't even know if they knew each other, would share, and they don't work alike, but you could see that drawing was really something they deeply believed in. And drawing is such a humbling act, you know. I mean, in a way, and Paul Cummings, I don't know, was the curator of drawing at the Whitney for many years, and I was lucky enough to meet him when I was a young man. He did the de Kooning show, and he was working on a book on Mark Tobey when he died. And he would take me around to look at different artists' drawings. So one of the things he said to me that was stuck in my head is, you can't lie in drawing, but you can lie in painting. And I just was like, what is that? You know, I was like 24 and thinking, I don't know what that means. And I suppose eventually I got what he was getting at, because he took me to so many galleries and had them show me work, and he was very generous to me, and I felt like this is my New York education.
Right.
But he also looked at people that no one, like I remember him saying, oh, you should look at Paul Cadmus.
Oh.
You know, and I was like 25 years old, and it's like, but no one looks at Paul Cadmus. He says, who cares? You know, and then go look at David Smith's work of drawings, and go look at Richard Archwager. I mean, he had a big heart in that way, and got me to really think through a lot. And I think when I first saw Nick's work, a lot of this stuff came back into my head of what Paul was getting at. You know?
Right.
And there's a kind of humility to be an artist who draws, because look, there's all this stuff that happened, and there's no way you're going to get past it, right? So you do it anyway. It's like being a poet. It's a ridiculous thing to do.
Right. Right. Yeah. Ro, did you have
Well,
any?
I just wanted to say that that Nick saw everybody's show and knew what was going on all the time. I mean, maybe not in the last couple of years when it was more difficult for him to get around, but he was always aware of what his colleagues were doing. He was in real fighting form about their imagery and what his was, and had a real appetite for any image, anything that was coming his way. So it would be hard for me to say just these things influenced him, these people.
Right. I guess we don't have actually a whole lot of time. We're running a little low. But I wanted to touch on a couple things. One, I guess, and you brought this out in your comments, John. This idea of Nick is typically categorized as an abstract expressionist, but he had this very long life and a lot of work. And I guess I wanted to see what people thought about that as a category for Nick, as a way of talking about that. Is that the right way to think of him? Is there some other way of talking about him that we can
Think
come
of
up with?
Bonnard, right? He keeps going, and at some point he's beyond whatever it was he was associated with in the beginning, and then finally you have to see Bonnard as Bonnard, not Bonnard as part of this group. And I think in a way there's a lot of artists. I'm going to say it's the same as, like, there are a lot of people say, who are like fans of Jasper Johns, and they'll say, oh, but he hasn't done anything since 1960. But he's actually lived another 57 years, and he has done a lot. And somehow I think people don't know how to look anymore. They get fixated on the 57 Chevy.
Right.
And that's the only model they can deal with, right? Like,
Right.
de Kooning's the 57 Chevy. I want to have one of those.
Yeah.
Kind of silly.
Yeah.
But I don't really, I don't think of him as an abstract expressionist.
Okay.
I think that when, the dust settles, so to speak, he's a figurative artist, and that he abstract expressionism, or that kind of mark making, the call and response, is something that he learned and was part of his language, purely in the 50s, but that the figure seems to come through stronger and stronger. And I think ultimately he's a figurative artist that, you know, went in that direction purely for a little while.
Right. Martica, did you have anything that you would want to add about that?
No.
No, okay, great.
I think if you're using the term abstract expressionist with capital letters, you know, as John said, for a brief time,
Right.
maybe. With small letters, you could apply that right along.
That makes sense. I also wanted to ask, in terms of what, you know, the show downstairs, what we've seen tonight, what kind of threads people see in Nick's work, right? What kind of things can we point to as characteristic of Nick's body of work as best we can tell?
Wow. There's the line, right? But there's also the form. I mean, just kind of, and he doesn't seem to make a distinction, right? That he wants both.
Right.
He wants to have his cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
How can you not like an artist like that? You know?
Yeah, I don't think he was ever satisfied. I mean, I think you could say that he mastered something and moved on and then reused it again and learned something else. And he just had this, he was, as I said in that little essay, always going further with things.
Right. Martica, anything?
To me, it's characterized by a lack of hesitancy.
Yeah.
What it is he's doing, does it?
Right. I agree. Were there any other questions that anyone on the panel had? If not, I think we should turn it over for questions from the audience.